K.W. Krieger presents The Obscura Dossier, Episode 11, Confession. Confession document authored by James McClelland, dated 13th of May 2005, concerning the death of Benjamin Roth and the events preceding it. Statement begins. I didn't do it. Not that it matters. You've already decided I'm guilty. I can see it in your eyes every time you look at me. Like I'm something rotten you haven't figured out how to scrape off your shoe yet. But I'm telling you now, and I'll keep telling you. I didn't lay a hand on Ben. I just found him. You asked for a written statement. This is the best you're going to get. Call it a confession if you like, but I won't use the word. I didn't kill him. Still, I know how it looks. If there's even the smallest chance you're willing to listen, really listen, then I'll tell you what happened. All of it. But it didn't start with Ben. Not really. You want to understand what happened that night, then we've got to go back to a few weeks before I was arrested, to early September. It was just another slow afternoon at the antiques shop on Russell Street. It's one of those cramped, overstuffed shops that seems like it's constantly in the process of toppling in on itself. Mahogany furniture wedged between bookcases, silver candlesticks tucked behind dusty glassware, rugs stacked like sediment layers across the floor. No music, no heating, just the smell of old varnish, dry paper, and, well, time. I've worked there for 7 years. Started part-time during uni, stayed on after that. Not the most glamorous line of work, but I liked the quiet. I liked the history. You get used to the rhythm of it. The soft chime of the doorbell, the slow shuffle of browsers who don't buy anything, and the occasional thrill when you come across something properly rare. I specialize in ceramics and decorative arts. 18th to early 20th century mostly. If you want to know the difference between a Sothera and a Meissen, I can tell you. I can tell you how to spot a forged Royal Worcester mark, or why early Delftware always has that slight grain to the glaze. Most of what we get is Georgian or Victorian. Tea sets, mantel clocks, the old morning brooch, tucked into a velvet box. You learn to read objects like people, how they've aged, what they've survived. They were meant to be. Once we had a Regency-era commode come through the back. Beautiful walnut, original brass fittings, one of those hidden compartments built into the base. Another time, a 17th century Flemish rectory cross, carved boxwood with a chipped inlay of mother of pearl. Probably held bone fragments, saints' fingers maybe. You'd be surprised how common that sort of thing used to be. But mostly it's just forgotten family heirlooms. Tired old things with fading stories. That was my life, really. Catalog, clean, price, repeat. Ben used to joke I knew more about dead people's teacups than actual living humans. He wasn't wrong. It was a quiet week. Business was slow, like usual. I spent most of my time cataloging a recent lot we'd taken in. Another shipment from a deceased estate up in Castlemaine. I think standard fare, mostly. A few Edwardian side tables, some late Victorian silver, an oil portrait of a man with his eyes like boiled eggs. Nothing out of the ordinary. At least, that was until I saw the vase I came across. It was near the bottom of one of the crates, wrapped in layers of yellowed butcher paper, packed tight between a brass bed warmer and a cracked mirror. It didn't look like much at first, just a regular vase, maybe 13, 14 inches tall. Dark, glossy surface, no chips, no cracks, intact, which is rare for anything loose in these shipments. I remember thinking it was heavier than it looked. At first glance, it reminded me of a classical amphora. Narrow neck, flared lip, two small handles curling in toward the neck. But the material was off. It looked like obsidian, or something close to it, volcanic glass. Maybe, but denser. It didn't have the brittleness you'd expect. And the surface wasn't smooth. It had a slight ripple under the glaze. Almost like cooled slag or petrified resin. The decorative work was unusual too. There were figures etched into the body of the vase, shallow and fine, almost like scrimshaw, but the style didn't match anything I'd recognized. It wasn't Greek, though it borrowed that sort of symmetry, and it wasn't Egyptian, despite a few vaguely familiar poses, and it definitely wasn't Aboriginal, which ruled out anything local. It didn't fit. Not cleanly, anyway. Not into any period or region or any school that I knew. I even considered it might be a modern piece made to look ancient. A sort of pastiche, but even that didn't quite add up. The baseware was consistent with age, but not with any known method of firing or production. No maker's mark, kill stamp, nothing. Still, I logged it like everything else, gave it a temporary ID, and set it aside on the counter. Just another puzzle to sort out later. Ben came by the shop a couple of days later. He wasn't staff or anything, but he'd often stop in when he had time between classes. We'd usually grab lunch together or just sit for a bit before heading home. He was studying fine arts over at VCA. Sculpture mostly, but he dabbled in mixed media, installation work. Found objects that kind of thing, always had a soft spot for things that were broken or didn't quite belong. He said he liked the suggestion of meaning more than anything too fixed. That day, he wandered in while I was working through the castle main lot. The vase was sitting on the front counter. I hadn't had time to move it or find a place in the display cabinet, and, well, he noticed it straight away. He asked me where it had come from, and I told him it had come in with the last shipment, said that I couldn't pin down the period, the style, any of it. It wasn't the sort of thing I'd expect to find in a regional estate sale. He seemed intrigued by that. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, said something about the shape being deliberate, the lines balanced in a way that felt intentional but not decorative. He wasn't interested in its age or origin, not in the way I was. What drew him in was the form, the feel of it. He liked objects that made him stop and think, especially when they didn't give up their meaning too easily. He asked if he could take it with him, just for a while, said he wanted to sketch it. I said that was fine as long as he was careful. It wasn't fragile, but something about it felt like it should have been handled gently. He wrapped it in his scarf, tucked it into his bag, and left without much more said. I didn't give it a second thought, not then. At least, everything seemed normal. Ben took the vase home and set it up in the little corner of our flat where he usually worked. He sketched it a few times, measured angles, played around with lighting. Nothing unusual. He mentioned it once or twice in passing and said it was interesting to draw, but not much more than that. But over the next week or so, I started to notice small changes. He was quieter, for one. Not silent, just less talkative. Distracted. Sometimes I'd catch him staring off while I was speaking, like his mind was somewhere else. When I asked, he'd snap back quickly, apologize, say he was tired or caught up in a project. It wasn't like him to be vague. Ben was one of those people who always made you feel like you were being properly listened to, always attentive and involved in the conversation. That was one of the things I admired most about him, but then, after a little while, there was the irritability. It started with little things, offhand comments, getting annoyed when I asked about dinner plans or left dishes in the sink. At first I thought maybe uni work was getting on top of him, or that he was stuck on a piece. Creative types have their cycles after all, but this felt different. There wasn't the usual frustration or restlessness. It was sharper, meaner. He'd get angry over nothing, really angry, and then retreat into himself like he regretted it instantly. I asked him once if everything was all right, and he just nodded without looking up from his sketchbook. Said he was fine. That was all. The thing is, Ben wasn't like that. He was one of the most even-tempered people I'd ever met. Calm, open, easy to be around. Nothing ever seemed to stick to him for long. Not stress, not drama. He had a good life. Supportive parents, a close-knit group of friends, and a sense of purpose in what he was doing. He wasn't carrying around any of that usual weight. So when it started to feel like something was pressing down on him, I noticed, and I couldn't explain it. The change wasn't overnight, it was gradual. But there were obvious signs that something wasn't right. Ben stopped talking about his other projects, stopped going to class too. At first he made excuses, deadlines, tutors, that didn't understand what he was doing. But the truth was, he wasn't working on anything else. The vase stayed on his desk, always in the same position, always surrounded by loose sheets of paper, bits of charcoal and pencil stubs. I never saw the drawings. When I asked, he said they weren't ready. He wasn't sleeping properly either. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear him moving around the flat, not doing anything, just pacing. Once I found him standing in the kitchen in the dark, hands flat on the counter, staring down at nothing. When I asked what was wrong, he didn't answer. Just blinked, like he'd forgotten where he was. Then the moods got worse. He'd go quiet for hours, barely acknowledged me, then suddenly, snap. Over nothing. Once, it was because I moved a stack of his sketchbooks off the table. Another time I asked if he wanted to get out of the house for a bit, and he slammed the bedroom door so hard it shook the frame. There was always that edge to it. Not just frustration, but something fraying at the seams, something deeper, more violent. I started to worry something had happened that he wasn't telling me about. A breakdown maybe, something personal, something I couldn't fix. I told myself he'd come out of it and that maybe this was just part of his process, some awful obsessive cycle he'd fallen into and just eventually would shake off. But it was the little things that really started to bother me. I found a spot of blood on the bathroom sink one morning, faint, but there. A few tissues in the bin with small rust-colored stains. Not much, but enough to notice. And honestly, I didn't think anything of it at first, a shaving nick maybe. He used to get nosebleeds when the air got too dry, but then it kept happening. Not every day, but often enough that I stopped dismissing it. There was a smudge on the towel, and he always rolled his sleeves down around me like he didn't want me to notice something. Those were the kind of details that only really stand out when you're already watching for them, and I was. Once I asked him if he'd cut himself on something. You know, casually, like it didn't matter. He told me he'd broken a mug and scraped his knuckle. I didn't press, but later I checked his hands. They were fine, not a mark on them. It wasn't until a few days after that I caught a glimpse of his arm. Just for a second, lifting his shirt to pull it over his head. There were marks along the inside of his forearm. If I knew any better, I would have thought they were scratches from a cat. Except we didn't own any pets. He never said anything, and neither did I. But from that point on, I couldn't pretend it was just stress. I kept telling myself it would pass, that whatever was happening to Ben, whatever was getting to him, would lift eventually. Maybe it was pressure, maybe burnout, maybe something he couldn't quite put into words. But it didn't lift. He barely ate, barely spoke. He stopped sleeping in the bed most nights, preferring the couch or the floor of his workspace, surrounded by sketches he'd never let me see. He flinched when I got too close, stared at his hands like they weren't his. The breaking point came on a Wednesday. I don't remember the date. I probably should, but it was cold and raining. I'd come home early. The flat was quiet. Ben was in the bathroom. The door was half open. I saw the blood before I saw him. He was sitting on the edge of the tub, shirtless, bandaging his forearm. There were more cuts now, more than before. I asked him what was going on. Not gently. I tried gentle. I told him I was scared, that he needed help. That I didn't understand what was happening, but something was happening. He didn't respond. Just looked up at me with this blank, exhausted face. Not of anger or guilt, just nothing. Like he wasn't even really there anymore. I stepped towards him, and that's when he lashed out. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't scream or break anything. He just stood up suddenly and struck me, open-handed, across the cheek. Harder than I thought he could. I stumbled back. I was stunned. He was not the type of person to ever be physical with me outside of the bedroom, but even then, he had never hit me. He didn't say a word. Just turned away and shut the bedroom door behind him. I left. I walked for maybe 15 minutes. Couldn't have been much longer than that. I don't even remember where I went, just kept walking through the streets, cold and soaked and dazed. My jaw ached, my eye was starting to swell, but none of that hurt the way it did knowing he had done it. When I'd come back, the flat was silent. The air had that heavy, wrong sort of quiet that buildings get when something terrible has already happened. Like the walls already knew. It was the smell that hit me first. Thick, metallic, and warm. The kind of scent that settles in your throat and doesn't leave. Underneath it was something worse. Rotten. Like when you leave meat in a bin for days out in the sun and it just smells swollen and sour. It was everywhere, clinging to the walls, the floor, and the air itself. The taste of the air was heavy and wrong. My stomach turned, but I kept moving. I don't know why. Morbid instinct, maybe. Some part of me already knew what I was about to see. The lights were on. Every one of them. The hallway was clear, but the moment I turned into the living room, it was like stepping into another world. There was blood everywhere, smeared along the walls in great looping strokes, layered so thickly in places it had begun to crack and dry. Pools on the floor, splatters on the ceiling. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, structured. The shapes were too intentional. Not letters, not any language I recognized, but glyphs. Almost. Curling repetitive marks repeating in sequences that didn't quite loop cleanly. I wanted to leave. I should have left, but I didn't. Ben was there, in the center of the room. Under the harsh glare of the pendant light, he hung, suspended from a rope tied to the ceiling beam. His toes were just brushing the floor, legs slack, the rope creaking softly with each breath of movement in the air. He was naked, his skin pale beneath the drying blood, which clung to him like a second skin. His body was covered in cuts, not haphazard or frenzied, but methodical. They were clean, parallel slices across his chest, stomach, arms, legs. It looked ritualistic, and his face was calm. His eyes were closed, his mouth was slack, like he'd finished something and there was nothing left to do. I stood there for I don't know how long. My mind emptied out. No panic, no scream. Just this hollow, sinking weight that pressed in behind my eyes and wouldn't move. There was no note, no message, just the symbols, the silence, and him. I don't remember calling the police. I must have. My phone was in my hand when they arrived. I don't recall what I said or how long it took. Everything after that came in flashes. Cold air from the open door, footsteps behind me, the sharp click of radios, someone asking if I was injured. I couldn't answer. I just kept staring at him. I don't think I moved until someone touched my shoulder. I flinched hard, and only then realized my hands were shaking. My face hurt, a deep, dull ache blooming under my eye. I told them Ben had hit me, that I'd left, and that when I came back... They asked me questions, took photos, led me outside, and sat me down on a footpath like I might collapse. I think I heard one of them vomiting in the stairwell. I couldn't look at the flat again. Not like I had the chance to. But the one thing I do remember, vividly and sharply, like it's seared into the back of my eyes, is the vase. It was still there, sitting on the corner of the coffee table, the only thing in the room untouched by blood. Everything else was soaked. The carpet, the walls, even the windows. But the vase? It was clean. Impossibly clean, like the blood had gone around it, or hadn't dared to touch it. And in the center of all that carnage, it looked somehow more pristine than it had the day I unpacked it. Like it had just been polished. Like it had been waiting. And for the briefest moment, a second, maybe less, I could have sworn it was glowing. Not bright, not obvious, just a faint, almost imperceptible luminescence. Like moonlight on oil. Something in the blackness that shimmered ever so slightly as the light passed over it. And then it was gone. Just a vase again. Well, the rest is history, isn't it? You lot showed up, asked your questions, took your photos, measured the scene. I gave my statement, I told you what happened, exactly as I've written here. But it didn't matter. None of it mattered. You arrested me. You found blood under my fingernails, bruises on my face, no witnesses to corroborate where I'd been that night. You decided that I'd snapped, that Ben and I had fought, and I'd killed him in some fit of rage and carved up the walls to make it look like something else, like madness. I know what it looked like, but I didn't do it. It's been 6 months. 6 months locked in here, waiting for a trial that's already decided. They call me unstable, dangerous. I heard one of the guards call me the Butcher of Carlton, under his breath, as if that's who I am now. And that vase, the one I told you about, it was right there in the middle of the room, right there on the coffee table, clean and untouched, and no one asked about it. Not once. Just another piece of junk in a crime scene. Another object nobody thought to question. No one else saw anything strange. Why would they? It's just a vase. But I still see it. In my dreams, just sitting there. Somewhere in the background, like it's always been there. Like it's waiting for something. And whenever I see it, I feel this weight in my chest, like pressure building behind my ribs. Like I want to scream or tear something apart, and I don't know why. It just makes me so angry. Statement ends. James McClelland was arrested in connection with the death of Benjamin Roth, discovered on the night of October 11th, 2004. In their shared apartment in Carlton, Melbourne, the crime scene was unusually violent and ritualistic in appearance. McClelland was found nearby with facial bruising and visible signs of psychological distress. No other individuals were considered suspects, and the incident was ruled a domestic homicide, and McClelland was later declared mentally unfit to stand trial. It should be noted that exactly 2 weeks after the statement was given, James McClelland was found dead in his cell. The scene was quite, well, let's just say that photos don't do it justice for how gruesome of a death he must have endured. The official cause of death was put down as a suicide, but I don't think a suicide could look the way that the photos look. The object described in the statement, the black vase of unknown origin, does not appear in any official inventory taken by the forensic team. No such item is listed among the evidence logged. The lounge photos taken at the scene show significant blood splatter and damage to the walls, but no item matching the statement's description is visible on the coffee table or elsewhere in the frame. If the vase was present, it has since vanished. There's something about this that reminds me of a case I skimmed a few weeks back. Something up in Cairns, maybe mid-90s. Similar material, volcanic glass, I think. There was a reference to some kind of behavioral collapse. I'll have to dig it up again, see if there's anything solid to connect it. Might just be coincidence. Might not. Until then, this case will be filed under anomaly code H-077-Zeta. Classification, object-bound anomaly. Status, active isolated disinformation risk. Priority medium. End recording. The Obscura Dossier is a podcast created by K.W. Krieger, licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 international license. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, drop a comment, and subscribe. And as always, until next time.